This is 6.8 notes over transformations. So the first thing I want you guys to do right here in this area is write down what the transformations are going to look like. So we're going to have an equation. A is going to be up top, bx minus c, and then plus d out here. Okay, so remember, if a is negative, we have a reflection over the x-axis. If a is greater than 1, we have a vertical stretch. If a is between 0 and 1, we have a vertical compression. Okay, and then B you won't see very often, but if B is negative, it's a reflection over the y-axis. If B is greater than 1, then it's a horizontal compression. And if B is between 0 and 1, then it's a horizontal stretch. Okay, so those are our transformation rules. If we look at C, C is going to be, we can add C or subtract C. If we add C, we go to the left. If we subtract C, you go to the right, shift right. And then same thing for D. If we add D, we shift up. If we subtract D, we go down. Okay, so those are the basic rules of the transformations. It's just they're kind of in different places, but A is going to be up top, B and C in the denominator, and D out here by itself. Okay, so if we look at number 1, if I wanted to state the transformation here, this 5 tells us that this was shifted up 5 units. Okay, and so what we need to look at here is we always want to find the VA and the HA. So there is no C value here, so that tells us that the VA is 0. Okay, and then the HA is going to be 5, so Y equals 5. And so we always want to start with our asymptotes, and when we plot this graph, that's what I'm going to start with. So I'm going to use a highlighter to show you the VA. So this is the VA. X is equal to 0, forms that line. And then Y is equal to 5, forms the horizontal asymptote at 5. Okay, and those are going to be my guidelines for my graph. Okay, so I've already entered this into my calculator, so I kind of already know the points, but we already have a point at 1, 6, and then we also have a point at negative 1, 4. And so if you were to plug this into your calculator, then you'd see a graph that looks something like this. Okay, and so there's our graph, and then we talk about the domain and range. So as we go left in the domain, it approaches negative infinity, also goes to positive infinity, so the domain is going to be all reals with the exception of 0. So x cannot be equal to 0, which is just our VA. And then the range approaches negative infinity and positive infinity, so that is also all reals, but in this case it cannot be equal to our HA. Okay, so we put a line through the equal sign, so that we know that cannot be equal to that. Moving over to number 2. Again, if I ask you to state the transformations, this is C, so that tells me that we move to the right 2 places. This is D, so we also go up 1. So this helps us with our HA and VA. So our VA right here is like C, so that's going to be x equals 2. And then our HA is D, so y equals 1. So again, I draw my my vertical asymptote at 2, and then my horizontal at y equals 1, and these are my guidelines. Okay, these are my guidelines. So again, I've done this one ahead of time. Points that I have are 3, 2, and 1, 0. And again, our graph is just a curve that hugs those lines. And again, like we did in the previous notes, domain and range are all reals, except they can't be equal to our VA or HA. So the domain cannot be equal to 2. The range cannot be equal to 1. So now looking at number 3. Okay, number 3 is different because of this square right here. And so again, I look for my VA and HA. And first, this is the A value, so it is 2, so this is going to be a vertical stretch. Okay, and so again, there was no C value, so X is equal to 0. There is no D value, so the HA is also equal to 0. Again, I use those as my guidelines. There's my VA, HA, and then since this was a vertical stretch, I have a point at 1, 2, and negative 1, 2, and since it was squared, it's going to look like this. Okay, so the domain doesn't change, it's still all reals, goes from left to right, negative infinity to positive infinity, with the exception when X is 0. The domain, or the range, however, does change. So the low value here is 0. The high value is infinity. So we can write that as 0 to infinity using parentheses because that means that they will not be equal to. Or we can say our y's are greater than 0. So that also tells the same thing, that we start at 0 and go up. Number 4, okay, this is the A value, this is the D value actually, so they just kind of rearrange the order here. So the negative on the A tells us that we have a reflection over the x-axis. And the 2 tells us we also have a vertical stretch. And then the D value tells us that we shifted up 3. Okay, so again, I start with my VA, no C value, so X equals 0. The D value is 3, so Y equals 3, the HA. And then again, I start with those 2 values. Here is X equals 0, the HA at 3, oh, a little off there, at 3. Again, those are my guidelines. This time, since it was reflected, I actually have a point at, I believe, 2, 1. And then I also have a point at negative 2, 4. And this is what my graph looks like this time. And so now my domain, again, same thing, negative infinity to positive infinity, so all reals, X cannot equal 0. And then my range, negative infinity to positive infinity, Y cannot equal 3. And then number 5 is a little bit different with how this is written down here. We need to factor out this negative, so that would give us X minus 1, so the negative is factored out. So that helps us better understand these transformations. So this is the A value. That tells us vertical stretch. Okay. The B value is negative, so that means a reflection over the y-axis. And then this minus 1 tells us that it was shifted right 1. Okay, so again, I just look at this. This time I do have a C value. It was right 1, so X equals 1. And then the HA, there is no D value this time, so that one is Y equals 0. And so I come in and I draw my VA and my HA. And I have a point at 2, -3. Again, I just plugged this in the calculator and this is what it gave me. And -2, 1. So those are my two values. My curve goes this way and that way. So again, all reals, x cannot equal 1. The range, also all reals, y cannot equal 0.